Hey everyone, it's Jason Voorhees and Chewbacca, back with our series of 52 weeks of personal injury, and this week is the spooky Halloween edition. So we're going to be talking to you today about what happens at a trial of an injury case. Unfortunately, Joel couldn't be here, and Chewbacca doesn't speak English, so I will be doing all of the talking. So let's start with the first step of a jury trial, which is voir dire. That's when we go to pick a jury. So basically what happens is the judge calls in a bunch of folks, usually between 36 to 40-ish, give or take, and the attorneys stand up, ask a ton of questions, and try to whittle down who's going to be actually on the jury panel, okay? We don't actually select jurors, we just eliminate potential jurors. So that's the first step. So once we get, pick the jury, the next step is, he's nailing it over here, opening statements. So the opening statement is when both sides present to the jury sort of a snapshot of what the case is going to be. Opening statements is not for argument, it's just simply to give them sort of a heads up of maybe the witnesses that you're going to hear from, what those witnesses may testify to, and things like that. So the plaintiff will go first, give their opening statements, and then the defense will give their opening statements. So then once you get through the opening statement portion, the next phase of the trial is plaintiff's case in chief. That's when the plaintiffs get to go first and present their evidence. This is when we call witnesses, introduce documents, and things like that. Once the plaintiff's case in chief is done, the next step is motions, right? So this is the phase because the plaintiffs have the burden of proving their case. So once the plaintiffs rest their case in chief, if for whatever reason the defense doesn't think the plaintiffs have done that, they'll bring it up with the court, right, in a motion, basically saying to the court, the plaintiffs haven't met their burden, we think you should go ahead and rule, okay? Once the motions are done, and hopefully the judge denies it, we go to the next step, which is the defendant's case in chief. This is when the defense gets up and puts on any evidence that they may have to refute what the plaintiff just said. A lot of times, depending on the type of case, the defense won't put up any witness. In a civil case, the burden of proof is basically what is called a preponderance of the evidence, which is more likely than not. So a common tactic we see from defendants is to not put up any evidence at all and simply say, we don't have the burden, we don't need to put on any evidence, we don't think the plaintiff did a good enough job to present their case. So after the defendants put on their evidence, the next step is, Chewbacca likes this step, closing statements. So this is when the lawyers get up and basically argue to the jury based on the evidence that's been presented on why they should find in favor of either the plaintiff or the defendant. And then if it's the plaintiff, they're asking for money in a civil case. If it's the defendant, they're usually saying don't give any money. So this is when everything kind of comes to an end and you present the case to a jury. All right, Chewbacca, what happens next? Jury instructions. This is when the judge basically reads the law to the jurors and tells them what they can consider when they're deliberating and looking over the evidence and trying to come to a resolution of the case. So once the judge gives the jury their instructions, the next part is jury deliberations. This is when we wait, and sometimes wait even longer for the jury to decide what it is they're going to do. Then, once the jury's decided and deliberated, sometimes it takes a couple hours, sometimes it can take a couple days. But once they've decided, they inform the bailiff informs the judge, and then what comes next? The verdict. Right, so then we get to hear from the jury what their decision was. We find in favor of the plaintiff and award X amount of dollars, or we find in favor of the defendant and award $0, or whatever it might be that they're deciding for that case. So, and then once the verdict is read, there'll be one more opportunity for the final step. More motions with the judge to determine whether or not the case even should be decided or if the verdict should stand. So I think that pretty much sums up, sort of a 30,000-foot view of what the general phases of a civil jury trial are. I hope you've enjoyed this spooky edition of our video series. Hopefully next week, if we're lucky, Joel will be back. I think Chewbacca's been a less than adequate fill-in, but he is here nonetheless. So Thanks everyone for tuning in. And if you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to our page, comment below if you have any topics you'd like for us to discuss, and we will see you next week.